So now we're officially going to start day 2 of CAD Bootcamp, and if you guys all have Autodesk Inventor open to this screen, that would be good. Again, if you have any questions, put it in the chat, and then I'll try to get to it. Okay, so you guys are all familiar with the screen, and we all created a part yesterday, and we explored a little bit about the sketch functions. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the sketch functions and learn a little bit more about the different types of constraints and what you can do. So go ahead and open up a part, which should bring you to this screen. All of you guys, make sure when you're done, send it in the chat so I know. I'll give you guys like 1 minute to open up a part. Okay. Now, again, it's a little bit of a review from yesterday. We're going to start the 2D sketch, and we're going to choose the XY plane again. And here you'll see that, give me a moment. I need to answer some stuff in the chat. Okay, so you guys should have opened the 2D sketch, and it should have this really familiar interface, which you guys should be familiar with since we went over it yesterday. So again, to reiterate from yesterday, we have this create tool where we can make lines, circles, a bunch of different shapes, and you can also make text. And then we also went over the constraint section yesterday with all of these constraints, like the tangent constraint we talked about, the equal constraint, the horizontal, vertical constraint, we all talked about all of that. Okay, so today what we're going to go over is we're going to look at the modify and the pattern, which is actually really, really important in Autodesk. It's something I use really often. So we're going to go over these two, and then we're going to show you how to take a 2D sketch and make it into a 3D part. So that's what we're going to do today. So hopefully you guys all remember what we did yesterday, but I'm just going to start off and demonstrate the tools from the modify and the pattern using some of the knowledge that we had yesterday. So I'm going to make a Lego brick. So for those of you who are familiar, I'm going to make a 2x4 just because you guys should, it's like one of Lego's most popular blocks. 0.2, I think that looks right. Okay. Anyway, I'm just going to pattern. So circle, again, you guys should be familiar. I'm going to make this 0.1. Okay. Dimension, did I mention what I went over yesterday? I'm going to make this, okay, 0.1 here and 0.1 here. Okay, so now you can see the circle turned black. I can't move it anymore. So if I want to have sort of like a Lego brick and have like one circle here, one circle here, one circle here, and one circle there, I could make every single circle individually, but especially with really complicated parts, and if you guys remember the robot that I showed you guys yesterday with hundreds of holes, you definitely don't want to be spending hours and hours making every single hole individually. So in this case, what you can do is you can make a pattern. So this pattern section is actually something we use really, really often. I'm going to demonstrate all the tools right now and show them to you. So in this case, what we would use is the rectangular pattern. So it's this little button up here, if all you guys can see that. So basically what it does is it takes this one geometry and it maps it along a line. That's why it's called the rectangular pattern. So I'll show you guys. When you click this rectangular, the first thing you do is this like the geometry thing, it should be like this. So you just click this, and then afterwards you're gonna click direction 1 and you're gonna click this. So basically you can see that there is like this little shadow of a circle here, right? But that's not the direction that I want my circles to go in. I want my circles to go in this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the directions. And now you can see that my little circle shows up here. So for this, you can choose to do two directions. Like I can pattern in this direction and this direction. So it goes 2 ways. And then I can also change the space in between the holes. Like for example, there's a huge space between this circle and this circle, but I want them to be right next to each other. So I can change the space in between from 1 inch to like 0.2, maybe a bit more, 0.3 inches. Okay, and then you'll see that it automatically moved. And since I'm also going this way, I can also change this to 0.3 inches. And you can see that this little circle, it shows up here. And look, because I'm doing both these 2 directions, the holes aren't just getting patterned in this direction and this direction. You can see that there's also one here because it makes a grid of holes. That's something really, really important to know. So if I go ahead and click OK, you'll see that all of these turn into circles. So that's really good, right? But obviously doing a pattern is a little bit different than doing every single circle individually, because when you do every single circle individually, they're isolated geometries. They don't have anything to do with each other. But when you do a rectangular pattern or a circular pattern, what you're doing is you're creating a relationship between all of them. So for example, remember that this is the original circle. But if I only want this circle, and I don't want this circle, I can't just right click it and delete this. I can only delete the entire pattern, which is definitely not it's not the same as if you just had a normal circle. But what I can do is a lot of times you can use something called the construction tool. So what the construction tool does is it changes it from a solid line to a dotted line so you can see it, but Inventor will ignore it for all purposes. So that's usually a good choice. You can also just edit the pattern, but usually this is what I prefer to do. So if you want to make something like this construction, you just click this, go here, and then you can see it becomes a dotted line. If you want to make it unconstruction, just click the construction one and then click this, and then it won't become construction anymore. So does everyone understand sort of the concept of the pattern? Type in the chat or give me a thumbs up. Okay, yeah, that's great to hear. So obviously there's two other buttons over here in this little pattern section. You also have the circular pattern tool and you have the mirror tool. So mirror is pretty self-explanatory. It just reflects it over a line. So I'm going to show you here. If you click mirror, you can select geometries. So I'm going to select three circles and then the mirror line, and then you can click this. So basically, that's not it. Okay, mirror line, and then click this line here, or I can click this line actually. Okay. And then if I click apply, you'll see that this entire thing was mirrored. It was mirrored along this line. So now that they're the same on both sides, which is something really important to know. So mirror, again, it's like pattern, it's a relationship. So these are not isolated individual geometries. So if you want to delete them, then you have to edit the mirror or pattern relationship. You can't just delete them individually because they're not isolated geometries. So do you guys sort of understand how the mirror tool works as well? If you guys aren't like 100% on all of them, but you just sort of get the concepts, that's fine. Because for Autodesk and just CAD in general, it's really hard to learn off theory alone and seeing other people demonstrate it to you. It's definitely something that you have to improve through hours and hours of practice. And so today, I'm just going to do a really short, quick lesson and then have you guys all practice and do something on your own. And that's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the classes for the duration of the rest of the boot camp. But for the first day, there was just a lot of things that we had to get out of the way. Okay? So I'm assuming that mirror makes sense, because yeah. So one of the students asked, why did the circles get mirrored on the left side rather than the right? So basically, if you notice the mirror line that I chose, it was this line right here, right? So the geometries that I originally wanted to mirror were here. So these were the geometries I wanted to mirror, and the line was on this side. So obviously, if there's stuff over here and then the line is here, Autodesk is going to mirror over here. If there's stuff over here and the line is here, then it's going to mirror on the other side. So basically, Autodesk is just going to detect the line, and then it's going to go on the opposite side of the line that doesn't have anything. So if the stuff was here and then the line was here, the geometries that would get mirrored would be on here, because this is like sort of like the more blank side. Does that make sense? Okay, that's good. So so this is what we have here. Okay, now I'm going to delete this stuff really quick. Now I'm going to show you guys the circular pattern tool. So I'm just going to scoot over a little bit. For the circular pattern tool, it's really similar to the rectangular pattern tool. Honestly, it's pretty self-explanatory. The rectangular pattern tool, it patterns things along the line, right? So basically what the circular pattern tool does is it patterns things along circles. So if you have this, let's make this 1 inch. So that's a big, big circle. Okay, I'm going to scooch this over a little bit. So this is a circle. If I want to make another ring of circles around the circle, like I want one, okay, I want one here, and then I also want one here and here and here and here. What I could use for this case is the circular pattern tool. So first start by selecting the thing that you want to pattern. You select the geometry you want to pattern, and then you select the axis. This is really important to note. It's the same thing for the rectangular pattern as well. Select the geometry first and then select the axis. And then afterwards, you can do a little bit of customization. For example, you can see that it's in this direction, which means that the patterns are going along in this direction. You can switch it if you want. It looks the same, but if I change the degrees and I only want it to pattern around half the circle, to 180 degrees, you can see that when I change directions, the pattern switch from here to here. Okay, and you can also change the number of circles. You can choose if you want like 90 circles, which is like a lot, or if you want like 3 circles, which is fine for me. Okay, I'll go ahead and click OK, and then afterwards you can just dimension it like normal. Like for instance, if you want this to be 0.25, and then all the rest of them will be 0.25 as well. Okay, so does the circular pattern sort of make sense to all of you guys now? Okay, that's good. So now I'm going to move on to a more simple concept. I'm just going to go over some of the important tools that I use often in the modify. So I'm going to start off by making a circle and then making a line that goes through the circle like this. So one really important tool that I actually use a lot in Autodesk, just because of its uses, is the offset tool. So the offset tool, it creates a shape it offsets a geometry from another one. So if you just read what, when you hover over it, the little text box, it sort of makes sense. So if you click the offset tool and you click the circle, you can choose to either go in or go out, and you can define the distance in between the circles. So here you can see that there's a 0.1 dimension that's set. You have to know that this is the distance in between the two circles. It is not the dimension of the circle, because if you actually look at the dimension of the circle, this circle is 1.5. So it offsets things from each other, and it defines a space in between two geometries. Okay, so another thing that I use a lot is, most of this I actually don't use very often because it's not something that you have to use often, but something that I do use a lot is the trim tool, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. So do you guys see how like I have this line and then I have this circle? So if I want the circle to be a flat circle instead of actually a round circle, I can use the trim tool and just cut. Do you guys see how the circles are gone? So that's sort of how the trim tool works. I can cut this, I can cut this, and then I can make like this little horseshoe. Okay, so that's the trim tool. Just to reiterate, we just went over the trim tool, the offset tool, the mirror tool, the circular pattern tool, and the rectangular pattern tool. Are all of you guys still with me? Yeah? Okay, that's good. So that's all the new tools that we're going to learn for today. We're going to draw a little bit of like a few more sketches, and then I'll show you guys something really cool. So up until now, everything we've been drawing has been very 2D. It's just like a drawing, it's a sketch. So it's not like an actual solid part like the ones that you saw in my robot. So the reason that is because we haven't done something called extruding. So right now we've been only working the sketch tab, but soon we're going to start working in the 3D model tab. So what we're going to do now, just for demonstration, I'm going to show you how to use the extrude tool. So the extrude tool is definitely one of the most commonly used buttons if you're trying to create a part, just because of its uses and how you use it. So what I'm going to do is draw a circle. Okay. So something important to know about the circle is that it's a closed geometry, so there's no openings. So to demonstrate what that means, this is a closed geometry. There's no holes or anything. But this over here, this is opened, because you can see that these two lines are not connected. There's a space in between. So if you click Finish Sketch, and you look at all these shapes that I drew, you can now use the extrude tool. The extrude tool takes a 2D sketch into a 3D part. So if I click the extrude tool, you'll notice that I can select the things that I want to extrude. So I'm going to try this again. So I can click this because it's closed geometry. And I can click this because it's a closed geometry, and so forth. I can also click this because it's a closed geometry. But you'll notice that I can't click this. Even when I'm clicking, I can't click it. That's because it's not closed. So something really important to remember is for extrusions, you have to have a closed geometry if you want to make a solid part. Okay? And then you can select as many profiles as you want, and you can also change the direction. You can make it this way, you can make it this way, you can make it evenly extruded or asymmetrically extruded, depending on your preference. So I'm just going to go with the default or the symmetric. It's actually pretty good practice to always use the symmetric, even though this is the default, just because it makes a lot of things easier in the long run. But for our purposes, default, flipped, symmetric, it all works. And then if I think this is too thick, or I want it to be thicker or thinner, obviously I can just customize the distance. So I can just make it 0.1, which would make it really thin. I'll probably end up putting it around 0.5. So okay. So now you see that I have a bunch of these shapes, and all the sketches that I originally had disappear. So if you want to go back and edit that sketch and make any changes, the sketch is available here. Double click, you're right back to where you were. But if not, the sketch will just sort of hide itself. So in the grand scheme of things, it won't get too confusing to watch. So does the extrusion tool make sense to everyone? Yeah? Okay. So that's good. I think for now that's like the first part we're gonna go over. We talked a little bit more about some other constraint tools in Autodesk Inventor, like the sketch mode, and we also talked about how to extrude stuff.